when an entire city danced itself to death, when a doctor saved lives with hand-washing but was branded insane, when a 25-foot wave of molasses flooded Boston's streets, or when the military lost a war against emus in Australia. History proves that reality is stranger than fiction. Tonight, you'll journey through true stories that sound utterly made up. Picture Strasbourg in 1518, where Frau Trophea stepped into the street and began dancing. Not celebration dancing, but compulsive, desperate movement that lasted for days. Soon dozens joined her, then hundreds, their feet bleeding as they danced through medieval cobblestones. Authorities hired musicians, thinking music might cure them. Instead, it made the dancing more frenzied. Some danced themselves to death from exhaustion and heart attacks. The gentle shuffle of modern feet on sidewalks reminds us how mysterious the human body remains, how easily our control can slip away like morning mist. What strange rhythms might still be sleeping in our muscles, waiting for the right moment to awaken. You're walking through Vienna General Hospital in 1847, where one man's simple observation would save millions of lives yet destroy his own career. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis noticed that maternity wards run by doctors had death rates 3 times higher than those run by midwives. The difference? Doctors performed autopsies before delivering babies, while midwives did not. When Semmelweis mandated hand-washing with chlorinated lime, death rates plummeted from 18% to less than 2%. Yet his colleagues ridiculed him, calling his theory absurd. They couldn't accept that gentlemen's hands could be unclean. Semmelweis was dismissed, ostracized, and eventually suffered a mental breakdown. He died ironically from an infection in an asylum, just before germ theory would vindicate everything he believed. How many other simple truths are we rejecting today because they challenge what we think we know? You're standing on a crisp January afternoon in 1919 Boston, where the air suddenly grows thick with an impossible terror. A 2.3 million-gallon molasses tank exploded, sending a 25-foot wall of syrup racing through the north end at 35 miles per hour. The sticky tsunami crushed buildings, overturned trucks, and trapped pedestrians in amber-thick death. 21 people died. 150 were injured, all from what sounds like a children's book gone wrong. The cleanup took weeks, with workers using salt water to dissolve the mess. For decades afterward, residents claimed they could still smell molasses on hot summer days, the sweet scent of tragedy lingering in the warm air like a ghost that refused to leave the scene of its strange crime. What other everyday substances around us carry the potential for such unexpected chaos? You're peering into 18th century France, where one man's appetite defied every law of human biology. Tarare could consume a quarter of a bull in a single day, yet remained painfully thin. His mouth stretched impossibly wide, his body temperature ran several degrees hot, and he sweated constantly from the metabolic furnace burning within. Doctors fed him live cats, snakes, puppies. Everything disappeared into his endless hunger. During the French Revolutionary Wars, generals used him as a courier, having him swallow documents in boxes to carry across enemy lines. His story ended tragically when he was suspected of eating a toddler. Even in death, his autopsy revealed organs grotesquely enlarged, his stomach filling most of his torso like a medical impossibility made flesh. What other hidden hungers might be dwelling quietly in the human condition, waiting to surprise us? You're wrapping yourself in extra blankets in the summer of 1816, when the world forgot how to be warm. Mount Tambora's eruption in Indonesia sent so much ash into the atmosphere that global temperatures dropped dramatically. Snow fell in June across New England, crops failed worldwide, and famine spread like a slow plague. In Switzerland, a young Mary Shelley spent that dark, cold summer indoors with friends, telling ghost stories to pass the endless gray days. From that volcanic winter came Frankenstein, one of literature's greatest monsters born from the Earth's own monstrous breath. Meanwhile, brilliant red sunsets painted the sky each evening, volcanic particles creating beauty from catastrophe, nature's way of turning destruction into art that poets would remember for generations. How often does our greatest creativity emerge from the world's unexpected disasters? You're entering the glittering yet dangerous world of 17th century France, where one woman rewrote every rule about femininity. Julie d'Aubigny, known as La Maupin, was an opera singer who fought over 10 duels and won them all. When her female lover was forced into a convent, Julie disguised herself as a nun, seduced the Mother Superior as a distraction, then set the building on fire to cover their escape. She sang on Paris stages while wearing men's clothes, kissed women publicly at royal balls, and once threw a rival's wig into the fireplace during a performance. The king himself pardoned her crimes multiple times, perhaps recognizing that someone so completely free couldn't be contained by ordinary laws. What would we be capable of if we ignored every social boundary that seems impossible to cross? You're listening to the quiet hum of electricity around you, thankful it flows reliably through modern wires. Unlike that September morning in 1859 when the sun decided to wage war on technology. The largest recorded solar storm sent northern lights dancing as far south as the Caribbean, painting tropical skies in impossible greens and reds. Telegraph lines caught fire, operators received electric shocks, and messages sent themselves without human hands touching the keys. Some telegraph systems worked better during the storm than when powered normally, drawing energy directly from the aurora-charged air. For a brief moment, Earth became a planet where the sky itself could power our machines, where natural forces reminded us how delicate our technological confidence really is. What other invisible energies might be waiting to disrupt our carefully ordered electronic world? You're standing in the American West of the 1870s, where two respected scientists turned fossil hunting into personal warfare. Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope began as friends, but became bitter rivals in the race to discover dinosaurs. They hired spies to infiltrate each other's digs, bribed workers to sabotage excavations, and even dynamited fossil sites to prevent their rivals' access. Newspapers followed their feud like a sporting event, printing insults and accusations while the two men burned through fortunes trying to outdo each other. They discovered over 130 dinosaur species between them, advancing paleontology through pure competitive hatred. Their personal war ended only with Cope's death, leaving behind museums full of bones and a lesson about how passion can become poison. What discoveries might we be missing when collaboration turns into competition? You're walking through medieval European villages, where an invisible contagion spread not through touch, but through sight. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, dancing manias seized entire communities. In 1374, crowds gathered along the Rhine River began dancing uncontrollably, leaping and writhing until they collapsed from exhaustion. The affliction spread from town to town like wildfire, but instead of fever, it brought compulsive movement. Priests performed exorcisms, doctors prescribed bloodletting, yet nothing stopped the epidemic of involuntary choreography. Some historians suggest ergot poisoning from moldy grain, others mass hysteria from social stress. The soft shuffle of our modern feet reminds us how easily the line between control and chaos can blur, how the body remembers rhythms the mind never learned. What other mysterious compulsions might be sleeping in our collective unconscious? You're standing in Western Australia in 1932, witnessing one of military history's most embarrassing defeats. After World War I, soldiers were given land to farm, but the Great Depression made their crops worthless. Then 20,000 emus migrated through their wheat fields, eating everything in sight. The government declared war on the birds, sending soldiers with machine guns to eliminate the enemy. the emus proved surprisingly tactical, scattering when attacked and regrouping elsewhere. After several weeks of battle, the military withdrew in defeat, having killed only a few hundred birds, while the emu army remained largely intact. Local newspapers mocked the outcome, and the story became a gentle reminder that nature doesn't recognize human authority no matter how many medals we wear. What other creatures might be quietly plotting to humble our technological confidence? Hey friends, if you're enjoying these gentle journeys through history's strangest moments, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing stories that prove reality is often more fascinating than fiction. You're standing on a quiet London street in 1814, where the cobblestones still whisper of the day beer became a tsunami. At the Moo and Company Brewery, a massive vat containing 388,000 gallons of porter burst, creating a domino effect that ruptured several more tanks. A 15-foot wave of beer surged through the streets of St. Giles, demolishing 2 homes and flooding basements where entire families lived. 8 people drowned in beer, their final moments submerged in what others paid to drink. The tragedy became darkly comedic when families affected by the flood were brought to court, where judges had to determine if death by beer was an act of God. The sweet, yeasty smell lingered for months, a reminder that even pleasure can become peril. What everyday comforts around us might be hiding their own potential for unexpected chaos. You're watching a railway construction crew in 1848 Vermont, where one man's terrible accident would unlock secrets of the human mind. Phineas Gage was preparing to blast rock when a tamping iron shot through his skull, entering below his left cheek and exiting through the top of his head. When a tamping iron shot through his skull, entering below his left cheek and exiting through the top of his head. Miraculously, he survived, walking and talking within minutes, but the gentle, responsible foreman was gone forever. The iron had destroyed parts of his brain that controlled personality, leaving behind someone his friends described as no longer Gage. He became impulsive, profane, unable to hold a job. His case became one of neuroscience's most famous, proving that personality lives in specific brain regions. The soft ticking of modern brain scanners echoes his contribution to understanding the fragile geography of who we are. How much of our essential self depends on a few ounces of delicate tissue behind our eyes. You're entering a watch factory in the 1920s, where young women painted clock faces with radium to make them glow in the dark. Their supervisors told them the paint was harmless, even encouraging them to lick their brushes to create fine points for detailed work. The women glowed softly in photographs, their hair and clothes dusted with radioactive powder they thought was magical. Within years, their jaws began to crumble, their bones became brittle as glass, and their bodies literally glowed with deadly light. Grace Fryer and her colleagues sued their employer, creating one of the first cases of industrial safety litigation. Their courage in courtrooms, despite weakening bodies, established workers' rights to know what materials they handle. The gentle tick of modern watches reminds us of their sacrifice, their light saving future workers from similar darkness. What invisible dangers might we be dismissing today as harmlessly magical? You're sitting in the British Parliament in 1738, where Robert Jenkins holds up a dried, severed ear and changes the course of empire. 7 years earlier, Spanish coast guards had boarded his merchant ship, accused him of smuggling, and allegedly cut off his ear as punishment. When Jenkins displayed his preserved ear to Parliament, public outrage erupted. Britain declared war on Spain, launching a conflict that would merge with the larger War of Austrian Succession. Thousands died in battles across the Caribbean and Europe, all supposedly because of one man's ear. Historians still debate whether the ear was real, fake, or even Jenkins's own. The soft whisper of turning pages in history books carries the absurd truth that wars can begin with the smallest, strangest provocations. What minor grievances in our world today might be quietly growing into tomorrow's major conflicts? You're descending into a small chapel in the Czech Republic, where human bones have been arranged into the most beautiful, macabre art imaginable. In the 14th century, the cemetery at Sedlec became so overcrowded that a local woodcarver was hired to organize the remains. František Rint created chandeliers from skulls, coat of arms from rib cages, and garlands from vertebrae. Over 40,000 skeletons were transformed into stunning geometric patterns that covered every surface. Families would visit to see their ancestors' bones incorporated into this sacred architecture of death. The gentle draft through the ossuary carries whispers of medieval faith, when death was not hidden away, but celebrated as part of life's eternal cycle. Visitors leave with a strange peace, having touched the democracy of mortality made beautiful. How might our fear of death change if we saw it transformed into art rather than hidden away? You're questioning everything you know about history as you consider Heribert Illig's startling theory from 1991. This German historian proposed that the years 614 to 911 CE never actually existed, invented by Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II to place themselves in the year 1000. According to Illig, Charlemagne was fictional. Byzantine records were forged and were actually living in the 1700s. He points to suspicious gaps in archaeological evidence, the strange transition from Julian to Gregorian calendars, and buildings that seem too advanced for their supposed time period. While mainstream historians dismiss the theory, it raises haunting questions about historical record-keeping. The steady tick of our modern clocks becomes mysteriously uncertain when we wonder if time itself might be a carefully constructed lie. How much of what we call history might be nothing more than agreed-upon stories told by the victors? You're entering 18th century England, where medical knowledge and gullibility created one of history's strangest hoaxes. Mary Toft, a servant from Surrey, claimed she had given birth to rabbits after being startled by one while working in fields. Royal physician Nathaniel St. Andre examined her and declared the births genuine, even witnessing her deliver rabbit parts in his presence. King George I sent his personal surgeon to investigate, and he too confirmed the miraculous births. For months, Mary became a medical sensation, with doctors publishing papers about her case. The truth emerged when an accomplice was caught sneaking rabbit parts into her room. Mary confessed to the hoax, explaining she had inserted dead rabbit pieces to fool the examining physicians. The soft rustle of medical journals reminds us how easily expertise can be deceived by desperation. What impossible things might we be accepting today simply because experts tell us they're true? You're witnessing the darker side of scientific discovery in the American West, where Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope turned paleontology into personal warfare. These respected scientists began as friends, but became bitter enemies in their race to discover dinosaur fossils. They hired spies to infiltrate each other's dig sites, bribed workers to sabotage excavations, and even dynamited fossil beds to prevent their rivals' access. Their crews engaged in actual gunfights over bone deposits, and both men published vicious personal attacks in scientific journals. They spent their fortunes trying to outdo each other, with Cope dying in poverty despite discovering dozens of species. Their feud advanced paleontology through pure competitive hatred, filling museums with prehistoric wonders born from very modern human pettiness. The gentle brush of paleontologists cleaning fossils today echoes their violent contribution to science. How much progress comes from competition rather than collaboration, and what does that say about human nature? You're entering the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic, where 40,000 human skeletons have been arranged into the most beautiful and unsettling religious art imaginable. After the cemetery became overcrowded in the 14th century, a half-blind monk began stacking bones into pyramids. Later, woodcarver František Rint transformed the remains into elaborate decorations, chandeliers made of skulls, coats of arms constructed from rib cages, and garlands woven from vertebrae. Every surface displays geometric patterns of human remains, creating a cathedral where death itself became the medium for worship. Families would visit to see their ancestors' bones incorporated into this sacred architecture. The soft whisper of air through empty sockets carries medieval faith, when mortality was not hidden but celebrated as part of eternal life. How might our relationship with death change if we transformed it into beauty rather than hiding it away? You're breathing through a handkerchief in London during the summer of 1858, when the Thames became an open sewer and democracy nearly died from the smell. Untreated human waste, industrial chemicals, and dead animals created a stench so powerful that Parliament hung lime-soaked sheets over windows and considered relocating the government. The smell was so intense that people vomited simply from walking near the river. Politicians rushed to pass legislation for London's sewer system, something they had delayed for years, proving that sometimes progress requires the right combination of crisis and disgust. Engineer Joseph Basil Jett designed the sewer network that still serves London today, built from the desperate need to breathe clean air. The gentle flow of modern plumbing reminds us that civilization's greatest victories often come from solving its most embarrassing problems. What basic necessities are we taking for granted that previous generations had to fight desperately to achieve? Hey friends, if you're finding comfort in these strange but true tales from history, don't forget to subscribe for more gentle journeys through humanity's most fascinating moments. You're watching the Northern Lights dance over tropical Cuba in 1859, when the sun decided to remind Earth who really controls the cosmic neighborhood. Richard Carrington, a British astronomer, observed massive solar flares just before the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history struck our planet. Telegraph lines worldwide caught fire, operators received electric shocks, and some systems worked better during the storm than when powered normally, drawing energy directly from the aurora-charged atmosphere. Gold miners in the Rocky Mountains woke to what they thought was dawn. So bright were the northern lights at 1 a.m. Messages sent themselves without human hands. And the gentle hum of our modern electrical world reminds us how delicate our technological confidence really is. What invisible forces are quietly waiting to remind us that nature still rules our electronic kingdom? You're stepping into the financial district of early 1900s New York, where the richest woman in America dressed in black rags and carried her lunch in newspaper. Hetty Green accumulated a fortune worth over $100 million through shrewd investments. Yet she heated only one room of her house, wore the same black dress until it fell apart, and allegedly let her son's leg become gangrenous rather than pay for proper medical care. She would travel miles to buy broken cookies at a discount and argued over free lunches at banks. She would travel miles to buy broken cookies at a discount and argued over free lunches at banks. When she died in 1916, she was worth more than $200 million in today's money, yet lived more austerely than many people in poverty. The soft rustle of modern banknotes reminds us that wealth and wisdom don't always walk hand in hand. How much of what we call rational behavior is really just our fears dressed up in logic? You're standing in the dusty badlands of the American West in the 1870s, where two respected paleontologists turned scientific discovery into personal warfare. Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope began as colleagues, but became bitter rivals in their race to uncover dinosaur fossils. They hired spies to infiltrate each other's dig sites, bribed local workers to destroy competitors' finds, and even resorted to dynamiting fossil beds to prevent their rivals' access. Their crews engaged in actual gunfights over bone deposits, while both men published vicious personal attacks disguised as scientific papers. Their crews engaged in actual gunfights over bone deposits, while both men published vicious personal attacks disguised as scientific papers. Between them, they discovered over 130 dinosaur species, advancing paleontology through pure competitive hatred. The quiet brush of modern archaeologists cleaning delicate fossils echoes their violent contribution to understanding prehistoric life. How much human progress comes from our noblest instincts versus our pettiest rivalries? You're standing on the deck of a ship in the early 1900s, next to a woman who seemed to attract maritime disasters like a magnet attracts metal. Violet Jessup was aboard the Olympic when it collided with HMS Hawke in 1911, sailed on the Titanic when it sank in 1912, and served as a nurse on the Britannic when it hit a mine and sank in 1916. She survived all three incidents, earning the nickname Miss Unsinkable. On the Titanic, she was handed a baby to care for in the lifeboat. On the Britannic, she nearly died when her lifeboat was sucked into the ship's propellers. Despite these traumatic experiences, she continued working on ships for decades, drawn back to the sea that had tried to claim her 3 times. The gentle rocking of modern cruise ships reminds us that some people are magnets for both disaster and survival. What forces draw us back to the very things that have hurt us most? You're standing in medieval Italy in 1325, where the theft of a wooden bucket would lead to a battle that killed thousands. The rivalry between Bologna and Modena had simmered for years, but when Modenese soldiers raided Bologna and stole an oak bucket from a well, it became the final insult. Bologna declared war, raising an army of 32,000 to reclaim their bucket and their honor. The Battle of Zappolino followed, where 2,000 soldiers died fighting over what was essentially a piece of carved wood. Modena won, kept the bucket, and it still hangs in the city's cathedral today, a reminder that wars often begin with symbols rather than substance. Modena won, kept the bucket, and it still hangs in the city's cathedral today, a reminder that wars often begin with symbols rather than substance. The quiet creak of modern wooden buckets echoes the absurd truth that human conflicts can start with the smallest provocations. What seemingly trivial objects in our lives might be worth fighting over if they represented something larger? You're walking through 1860s San Francisco, where a bankrupt businessman declared himself Emperor of the United States and somehow convinced an entire city to play along. Joshua Norton lost his fortune in a rice speculation scheme, disappeared for months, then returned proclaiming himself Norton the First, Emperor of these United States and Protector of Mexico. He issued his own currency, which local businesses accepted, ate free meals at restaurants, and attended theater performances in special reserved seating. He issued his own currency, which local businesses accepted, ate free meals at restaurants, and attended theater performances in special reserved seating. He ordered the construction of a bridge from San Francisco to Oakland decades before it was built, abolished Congress by decree, and threatened to arrest corrupt politicians. When he died in 1880, 30,000 people attended his funeral. The gentle cable car bells still ring through San Francisco, carrying echoes of when the city decided that sometimes the best leaders are the ones nobody elected. What would happen if we treated our most imaginative citizens as royalty instead of dismissing them as eccentric? You're descending into the catacombs of Paris, where 6 million skeletons have been arranged into the world's largest underground ossuary. In the 18th century, overflowing cemeteries threatened public health, so authorities moved remains to abandoned limestone quarries beneath the city. Workers didn't simply dump the bones, they created art. Femurs became walls, skulls formed decorative patterns, and rib cages created archways in a vast underground city of the dead. Visitors would descend by candlelight to walk among their ancestors, transformed into a subterranean cathedral where death became beautiful architecture. The inscription above reads, "Stop. This is the Empire of Death." Visitors would descend by candlelight to walk among their ancestors, transformed into a subterranean cathedral where death became beautiful architecture. The inscription above reads, "Stop. This is the empire of death, yet the careful arrangement speaks of reverence rather than horror. The soft echo of footsteps in modern subway tunnels reminds us that beauty can emerge from our most morbid necessities. How might our relationship with mortality change if we made art from death instead of hiding it away? You're standing in 1666 London as flames consume 13,200 houses. Yet somehow this destruction would create one of history's greatest urban planning successes. The fire burned for 4 days, destroying 80% of the medieval city, including Old St. Paul's Cathedral and most of the financial district. Yet from this apparent catastrophe came Christopher Wren's magnificent church designs, wider streets that prevented future fires and improved sanitation that ended plague outbreaks. The disaster cleared away centuries of chaotic building, allowing for planned reconstruction that made London a model for modern cities. Insurance companies were born from the ashes. Building codes were established. The disaster cleared away centuries of chaotic building, allowing for planned reconstruction that made London a model for modern cities. Insurance companies were born from the ashes. Building codes were established. And the Great Fire of London became the great opportunity for urban renewal. The gentle hum of modern city planning departments echoes the lesson that sometimes destruction clears the way for unprecedented progress. What seemingly catastrophic changes in our lives might actually be clearing space for something better? You're entering an 18th century English tavern where the woman behind the bar could set broken bones better than any university-trained physician. Sarah Mapp, known as Crazy Sally, had no medical training but possessed an intuitive understanding of human anatomy that drew patients from across Europe. She would relocate dislocated joints with a single confident movement, reset broken bones that surgeons had declared hopeless, and cure conditions that had baffled the medical establishment. Her tavern became a pilgrimage site for the injured, and she grew wealthy enough to ride to work in her own carriage. Her tavern became a pilgrimage site for the injured, and she grew wealthy enough to ride to work in her own carriage. When she died, the medical profession breathed easier, yet her techniques influenced orthopedic medicine for generations. The gentle click of modern X-ray machines reminds us that sometimes the most profound healing comes from hands that never learned to doubt their intuition. How much expertise comes from formal training versus natural talent that refuses to be taught? You're walking along the Rhine River in 1374, where hundreds of people have begun dancing uncontrollably in the streets, unable to stop until they collapse from exhaustion. The mania started in Aachen and spread like wildfire through European towns, with entire communities seized by compulsive movement. Dancers leaped, twisted, and writhed for hours or days, some reporting visions of demons or saints. Authorities hired musicians, thinking music might cure them, but it only intensified the frenzy. Some historians suggest ergot poisoning from moldy grain, others mass hysteria from social stress, but witnesses described it as supernatural possession. The soft shuffle of our modern feet on sidewalks reminds us how mysterious the connection between mind and body remains, how easily our sense of control can slip away like morning mist in the face of invisible forces. What rhythms might be sleeping in our muscles, waiting for the right moment to take control? You're riding across the dusty American frontier in the 1870s, where two respected paleontologists turned dinosaur hunting into the Wild West's strangest gunfight. Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope began as colleagues but became mortal enemies in their race to discover prehistoric giants. They hired armed guards to protect dig sites, dynamited fossil beds to prevent rivals from accessing them, and engaged in actual shootouts over bone deposits. Their crews carried rifles alongside brushes, treating science like claim jumping in a gold rush. Between gunfights and sabotage, they discovered over 130 dinosaur species, filling museums with wonders born from academic hatred. The gentle brushstrokes of modern paleontologists cleaning fossils echo their violent contribution to understanding Earth's ancient past, reminding us that knowledge sometimes emerges from our most destructive impulses. How much of human progress comes from competition rather than collaboration? You're entering a wealthy New York kitchen in 1906, where Mary Mallon prepares meals with hands that carry invisible death. As a cook for affluent families, Mary unknowingly spread typhoid fever to dozens of people while remaining perfectly healthy herself. She was one of the first known asymptomatic carriers, a medical mystery that baffled doctors who couldn't understand how someone so vibrant could be so dangerous. When authorities finally tracked the outbreaks to her, Mary refused to believe she could harm anyone while feeling fine. She was quarantined on North Brother Island for 3 years, released on promise to never cook again, then promptly returned to kitchens under false names. The gentle sizzle of modern cooking reminds us that the most dangerous threats are often invisible, carried by those who mean no harm. What invisible dangers might we be spreading without ever knowing it? You're standing in the wheat fields of Western Australia in 1932, where 20,000 emus have invaded farmland and the military has been called to stop them. World War I veterans turned farmers watched helplessly as these massive birds destroyed their crops during the Great Depression. The government responded by sending soldiers with machine guns to eliminate the enemy. What followed was a comedy of military incompetence. The emus proved surprisingly tactical, scattering when attacked and regrouping elsewhere. After weeks of battle, the army withdrew in defeat, having killed only a fraction of the emu population while providing endless entertainment for newspaper readers. The soft rustle of modern wheat fields carries echoes of this absurd conflict, reminding us that nature doesn't recognize human authority no matter how many uniforms we wear. What other creatures might be quietly plotting to humble our technological confidence? You're watching the dismantling of London Bridge in 1968 stone by stone, as it prepares for an impossible journey to the American desert. Robert McCulloch, an American entrepreneur, bought the historic bridge for $2.46 million and had it shipped 5,400 miles to Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Each stone was numbered and cataloged, then reassembled in the desert like the world's largest jigsaw puzzle. Local legend claims McCulloch thought he was buying the more famous Tower Bridge, but he knew exactly what he was purchasing. The bridge now spans a man-made channel in Arizona, complete with English atmosphere in the middle of nowhere. The gentle lapping of Lake Havasu's waters against London's medieval stones reminds us that in the modern world, even history can be packaged, shipped, and reassembled wherever someone has the vision and money to imagine it. What other pieces of the past might be waiting to be transplanted into unexpected futures? You're descending into the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic, where 40,000 human skeletons have been arranged into the most beautiful and unsettling religious art imaginable. When the cemetery became overcrowded in the 14th century, a half-blind monk began organizing the remains into neat pyramids. Later, woodcarver František Rindt transformed them into elaborate decorations. Chandeliers made entirely of skulls and bones, coats of arms constructed from rib cages, and garlands woven from vertebrae. Every surface displays geometric patterns of human remains, creating a cathedral where death itself became the medium for worship. Families would visit to see their ancestors' bones incorporated into this sacred architecture. The soft echo of footsteps through the ossuary carries medieval faith, when mortality was not hidden, but celebrated as part of life's eternal cycle. How might our relationship with death change if we transformed it into art rather than hiding it away? You're standing at the Greek-Bulgarian border in 1925, where a small dog's wandering would nearly spark a European war. A Greek soldier's dog crossed into Bulgarian territory and was shot by a border guard. When the soldier went to retrieve his pet, Bulgarian forces killed him too. Greece demanded compensation and invaded Bulgaria when refused, occupying several border towns. The League of Nations intervened, threatening sanctions against Greece and forcing withdrawal. The incident killed 52 people and cost millions, all because a dog strayed across an invisible line in the ground. The gentle panting of modern pets reminds us how quickly small incidents can escalate when nations are looking for excuses to fight, how the most absurd triggers can unleash very real consequences. What minor misunderstandings in our world today might be growing into tomorrow's major conflicts? You're entering the study of Dr. Thomas Mutter in 1850s Philadelphia, where medical oddities line the walls like macabre artwork. Mutter collected specimens of human abnormalities, diseased organs, and surgical curiosities, believing that confronting medical mysteries would advance healing. His collection included conjoined twins preserved in jars, tumors the size of footballs, and skulls showing the effects of various diseases. What began as educational tools became Philadelphia's strangest tourist attraction. Wealthy visitors would tour his home to see pickled punks and anatomical wonders, while Mutter explained each specimen's medical significance. His collection eventually became the Mutter Museum, where death serves education rather than entertainment. The quiet hum of modern medical equipment echoes his belief that understanding our physical fragility helps us appreciate the miracle of health. How might our fear of disease change if we studied our vulnerabilities instead of hiding from them? You're flying over Europe in the 1980s, where wine production has become so successful that massive lakes of surplus wine stretch across the countryside. The European Economic Community's agricultural policies encouraged wine production so effectively that farmers produced far more than anyone could drink. Millions of gallons of perfectly good wine were stored in emergency tanks, creating literal wine lakes that cost taxpayers millions to maintain. Some wine was distilled into industrial alcohol, some was destroyed, and desperate officials even suggested using it to fuel cars. The crisis revealed the absurdity of bureaucratic success. When incentives work too well, they create problems nobody anticipated. The gentle swirl of wine in modern glasses reminds us that even abundance can become a burden when it exceeds all reasonable need. What other successes in our lives might be quietly creating their own unexpected problems? You're entering a laboratory in 1930s America where Francis Glessner Lee is creating miniature crime scenes with dollhouse precision. These nutshell studies of unexplained death featured tiny corpses, bloodstains, and evidence clues, all meticulously crafted to train investigators in observation skills. Lee, a wealthy grandmother, became fascinated with forensic science when police work was largely guesswork. Her miniature models taught detectives to notice details they might miss at real crime scenes. The position of a body, the pattern of blood spatter, the placement of objects. She revolutionized criminal investigation by proving that tiny details could solve big mysteries. The gentle click of modern forensic cameras echoes her lesson that truth hides in the smallest observations, waiting for eyes trained to see what others miss. What crucial details in our daily lives might we be overlooking because we haven't learned how to truly see? You're sailing through the Coral Sea in 2012, searching for Sandy Island, a landmass that appeared on maps for over a century but doesn't actually exist. French explorers marked it in 1876, and it appeared on everything from Google Earth to official naval charts, supposedly sitting between Australia and New Caledonia. When Australian scientists finally sailed to investigate, they found nothing but deep ocean. The island had been copied from map to map for 136 years, a cartographic ghost that nobody had bothered to verify. When Australian scientists finally sailed to investigate, they found nothing but deep ocean. The discovery that Sandy Island never existed forced geographers to question what other phantom lands might be hiding in plain sight on our most trusted maps. The gentle splash of waves against real islands reminds us that even our most scientific certainties sometimes rest on assumptions nobody has bothered to check. What other facts might we be accepting simply because they appear on authoritative sources? You're peering into a miniature bedroom in 1940s Harvard, where Francis Glessner Lee is arranging tiny corpses with scientific precision. These weren't toys, but training tools called nutshell studies of unexplained death. Dollhouse-sized crime scenes complete with bloodstains, evidence, and clues. Lee, a wealthy grandmother fascinated by forensic science, spent fortunes creating 18 detailed models that taught detectives how to observe. Each scene contained enough evidence to solve the mystery if investigators knew how to look. Her tiny victims wore hand-knitted clothes, lay in accurately furnished rooms, and died from precisely recreated wounds. Police departments worldwide sent officers to study these macabre masterpieces. The gentle click of modern camera shutters at crime scenes echoes her revolutionary lesson that truth hides in the smallest details. What crucial evidence in our daily lives might we be missing because we haven't learned to truly see? You're floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in 1997, where Captain Charles Moore discovers an island made entirely of human trash. Twice the size of Texas, this swirling mass of plastic debris had been growing silently for decades, invisible to satellites but devastating to marine life. Moore stumbled upon it while sailing home from a yacht race, finding himself surrounded by bottles, bags, and fragments stretching beyond the horizon. The patch isn't solid, but a soup of microplastics that marine animals mistake for food, creating a food chain of poison that reaches human dinner tables. What began as convenient packaging became an ocean-sized monument to human thoughtlessness. The gentle lapping of waves against plastic reminds us that everything we throw away eventually finds its way to somewhere, often places we never intended. What other invisible consequences of our convenience might be accumulating in places we'll never see? You're standing in colonial Ghana in 1900, where British Governor Frederick Hodgson demands to sit on the most sacred object in Ashanti culture. The golden stool wasn't furniture, but the embodiment of the Ashanti nation's soul, believed to contain the spirits of all their ancestors. When Hodgson insisted on using it as his throne, the Ashanti people united in outrage that transcended politics and became spiritual warfare. The resulting conflict lasted months, with thousands dying to protect what the British saw as mere decoration, but the Ashanti knew as their civilization's heart. The real golden stool was hidden so successfully that it remained lost for over 20 years, protected by a silence that no torture could break. The soft whisper of wind through Ghanaian forests still carries the lesson that some treasures are sacred precisely because they cannot be possessed. What objects in our lives hold power far beyond their material value? You're descending into the charnel house of Hallstatt, Austria, where death has been transformed into the most delicate art for over 600 years. When the cemetery became overcrowded, families would exhume their ancestors' remains after 10 years and decorate the skulls with flowers, names, and dates before placing them in the ossuary. Each skull became a canvas painted with roses, ivy, and crosses in soft colors that turned death into beauty. Families would visit their decorated relatives, maintaining relationships that transcended mortality. The tradition continued until 1960, creating a gallery where over 600 painted skulls rest in peaceful rows, each one a person who was loved enough to be remembered as art. The gentle echo of footsteps in the bone chapel reminds us that love finds ways to make even death beautiful. How might our relationship with loss change if we transformed grief into art rather than hiding it away? You're sailing toward ancient Alexandria, where the world's first lighthouse rose nearly 400 feet into the sky, taller than most modern buildings. Built in 280 BCE by Sostratos of Cnidus, this engineering marvel used mirrors to reflect sunlight during the day and fire by night, visible from 35 miles at sea. For over 1,500 years, it guided ships through treacherous waters while housing a library, observatory, and religious shrine in its upper floors. Earthquakes finally toppled this wonder of the world in the 14th century, but its influence lived on in every lighthouse built afterward. Medieval Arab writers described its bronze mirrors as so precisely curved they could spot ships approaching from Constantinople. The gentle beam of modern lighthouses carries echoes of this ancient achievement, reminding us that human ingenuity peaked earlier than we often imagine. What other ancient innovations might surpass our current capabilities if we truly understood how they worked? You're walking through 18th century Edinburgh, where medical students and professors wage secret wars against graveyards to advance human knowledge. William Burke and William Hare became history's most notorious body snatchers, but they were part of a larger underground economy where fresh corpses sold for more than most people earned in months. Medical schools needed bodies for dissection, but religious laws prohibited using anyone except executed criminals. This created a bizarre marketplace where resurrection men would steal fresh graves within hours of burial, selling them to anatomy professors who asked no questions. The practice advanced medical knowledge dramatically while terrorizing the public, who installed iron cages called mort safes over graves to protect their dead relatives from scholarly ambition. What knowledge do we take for granted that was built on morally questionable foundations? You're standing in Rome during 238 CE, witnessing the political chaos that would make modern elections seem calm by comparison. 6 different men claimed the title of emperor within a single year, each one meeting increasingly creative ends. It began when the elderly Gordian I and his son proclaimed themselves co-emperors in Africa, only to die within weeks. The Senate appointed 2 more emperors simultaneously, then watched as Maximinus Thrax marched on Rome claiming the throne was his. When citizens assassinated Maximinus, his successor lasted barely 3 months before being killed by his own guards, who then elevated the teenage Gordian III to power. The gentle rustle of modern ballot papers reminds us that peaceful transitions of power are far more miraculous than they appear, requiring agreements that break down more easily than we imagine. How many of our political assumptions rest on fragile traditions that could collapse without warning? You're descending beneath Paris in 1786, where Alexandre Lenoir oversees the transformation of abandoned limestone quarries into the world's largest ossuary. Overflowing cemeteries threatened public health, so authorities decided to move 6 million skeletons into underground tunnels. But instead of simply dumping bones, workers created art. Femurs became walls, skulls formed decorative patterns, and entire chambers were designed as underground chapels where death became beautiful architecture. Visitors descended by torchlight to walk among their ancestors, transformed into a subterranean city where mortality became a tourist attraction. The careful arrangement speaks of reverence rather than horror, turning practical necessity into profound art. The soft echo of footsteps in modern subway tunnels reminds us that beauty can emerge from our most morbid needs when human creativity confronts inevitable death. How might our fear of mortality change if we transformed it into art instead of hiding it underground? You're listening to Geoffrey Chaucer read aloud in medieval England, where the language sounds more like German than the English we know today. Between 1400 and 1700, English pronunciation underwent the most dramatic transformation in its history, called the Great Vowel Shift. Words like bite were pronounced beat, house sounded like whose, and name rhymed with psalm. No one planned this change. It happened gradually as speakers unconsciously shifted their vowel sounds over generations. The printing press, invented during this transition, froze spelling while pronunciation continued evolving, creating the notorious difficulty of English spelling. Shakespeare's poetry reveals the ongoing changes, with rhymes that only work if you know how words sounded centuries ago. The gentle rhythm of modern speech carries echoes of this mysterious transformation that changed how an entire nation expressed itself. What other gradual changes in our world might be reshaping everything without our awareness? You're sitting in the British Parliament in 1738, where Captain Robert Jenkins displays a severed ear that will launch a war spanning 2 continents. 7 years earlier, Spanish Coast Guards had allegedly cut off Jenkins' ear while searching his ship for contraband. When he presented the preserved ear to Parliament, public outrage erupted over this violation of British honor. Britain declared war on Spain, beginning a conflict that merged with the larger War of Austrian Succession and killed thousands across the Caribbean and Europe. Historians still debate whether the ear was real, stolen from someone else, or entirely fabricated for political purposes. The gentle whisper of turning pages in history books carries the absurd truth that major conflicts can begin with the smallest provocations when nations are seeking excuses to fight. What minor grievances today might be quietly growing into tomorrow's major conflicts? Hey friends, if these soothing journeys through history's most bewildering corners are helping guide you toward sleep, don't forget to subscribe for more gentle tales that prove human truth is endlessly stranger than fiction. You're entering the studio of Andreas Vesalius in 16th century Belgium, where the father of modern anatomy performs illegal dissections by candlelight. While church law forbade cutting open human bodies, Vesalius knew that ancient medical texts were wrong about human anatomy. He secretly obtained corpses from gallows and graveyards, carefully documenting what he found inside. His detailed drawings revealed that men don't have 1 fewer rib than women. Hearts have 4 chambers, not 3, and blood doesn't flow through invisible pores in the heart. When he published these findings, the medical establishment accused him of heresy for contradicting ancient authorities. His revolutionary book, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, featured anatomical illustrations so beautiful they became art as much as science. The gentle scratch of modern medical pencils echoes his courage to see truth with his own eyes, rather than believing inherited wisdom. What other established facts might crumble if we had the courage to look for ourselves? You're standing in the wheat fields of Western Australia in 1932, where 20,000 emus have invaded farmland and the government has declared actual war on birds. World War I veterans turned farmers watched helplessly as these massive creatures destroyed their crops during the Great Depression. The military response was swift and confident. Soldiers armed with machine guns would eliminate the enemy. What followed was 3 weeks of tactical embarrassment. The emus proved surprisingly intelligent, scattering when attacked and regrouping elsewhere like feathered guerrilla fighters. Despite thousands of rounds fired, only a few hundred birds were killed. The war ended with military withdrawal and newspaper headlines mocking the defeat. Local farmers eventually succeeded where the army failed, using simple fencing and poison baits. The gentle rustle of modern wheat reminds us that nature doesn't recognize human authority, no matter how many uniforms we wear. What other creatures might be quietly plotting to humble our technological confidence? You're meeting František Rindt in 1870s Bohemia, a woodcarver who transformed 40,000 human skeletons into the most beautiful religious art imaginable. The cemetery at Sedlec had become catastrophically overcrowded after plague and war filled it beyond capacity. When hired to organize the remains, Rindt didn't simply stack bones. He created masterpieces. Chandeliers made entirely from skulls and arm bones, coats of arms constructed from rib cages and pelvises, garlands woven from vertebrae that decorated every surface. His signature, carved from bones, hangs in the corner like a carpenter's proud mark. Families visited to see their ancestors incorporated into this sacred architecture, death transformed into something beautiful rather than hidden. The soft echo of footsteps through the ossuary carries medieval faith, when mortality was celebrated rather than feared, when art could emerge from humanity's most universal experience. How might our relationship with loss change if we transformed it into beauty rather than hiding it away? You're standing in medieval Italy in 1325, where the theft of a simple wooden bucket will lead to a battle that kills 2,000 soldiers. The cities of Bologna and Modena had nursed rivalry for generations. But when Modenese raiders stole an oak bucket from a Bolognese well, it became the final insult that demanded blood. Bologna raised an army of 32,000 to reclaim their bucket and their honor, while Modena gathered 7,000 defenders who refused to return what they'd rightfully stolen. The Battle of Zappolino followed, where thousands died fighting over what was essentially a piece of carved wood that held water. Modena won decisively, kept the bucket, and it still hangs in their cathedral today, a monument to the absurd triggers of human conflict. The quiet creak of modern wooden objects reminds us that wars often begin with symbols rather than genuine grievances. What seemingly trivial possessions in our lives might be worth fighting over if they represented something larger. You're examining a tiny crime scene in 1940s America, where Dolly Parton look-alike Earl Stanley Gardner consults on Francis Glessner Lee's revolutionary forensic training. These nutshell studies of unexplained death were dollhouse-sized crime scenes so detailed they included bloodstain patterns, fingerprints on miniature glasses, and corpses wearing hand-knitted clothing. Lee spent her inheritance creating 18 perfect models that taught police to observe rather than assume. Each scene contained enough evidence to solve the mystery, if investigators learned to notice details like the direction of blood spatter or the position of a fallen body. Her work revolutionized criminal investigation by proving that truth lived in tiny observations most people missed. The gentle click of modern forensic cameras echoes her lesson that the smallest details often hold the largest truths, waiting for eyes trained to see what others overlook. What crucial evidence in our daily lives might we be missing because we haven't learned to truly observe? You're flying over the European countryside in the 1980s, where agricultural policy has created lakes of wine stretching across multiple nations. The European Economic Community's subsidies encouraged wine production so successfully that farmers produced far more than the world could drink. Millions of gallons of perfectly good wine were stored in emergency tanks, creating literal wine lakes that cost taxpayers billions to maintain. Desperate officials tried distilling wine into industrial alcohol, destroying it outright, or even proposing to fuel cars with vintage Burgundy. The crisis revealed the absurdity of bureaucratic success. When incentives work too well, they create problems nobody anticipated. French farmers protested when authorities tried to limit production, arguing that wine was their cultural heritage, not just agriculture. The gentle swirl of wine in modern glasses reminds us that abundance can become its own form of crisis when it exceeds all reasonable limits. What other successes in our world might be quietly creating their own unexpected disasters? You're witnessing the bitter rivalry between Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope in 1870s America, where dinosaur hunting became literal combat. These respected scientists began as friends, but transformed into enemies who hired armed guards, dynamited fossil sites, and published vicious personal attacks disguised as research papers. Their crews engaged in gunfights over bone deposits while both men spent fortunes trying to outdo each other in discoveries. Cope died in poverty despite finding dozens of species, while Marsh used his wealth and political connections to destroy his rival's reputation. Between their hatred and competition, they discovered over 130 dinosaur species, filling museums with prehistoric wonders born from very human pettiness. The quiet brush strokes of modern paleontologists cleaning fossils echo their violent contribution to understanding ancient life, proof that knowledge sometimes emerges from our worst impulses rather than our noblest ones. How much human progress comes from competition rather than collaboration, and what does that say about our nature? You're questioning everything you know about history. As German historian Heribert Illig presents his startling 1991 theory that 297 years never actually happened. Never. According to Illig, the years 614 to 911 CE were invented by Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II to place themselves in the prestigious year 1000. This would mean Charlemagne was fictional, Byzantine records were forged, and were actually living in the 1700s. He points to suspicious gaps in archaeological evidence, the strange transition from Julian to Gregorian calendars, and buildings that seem too advanced for their supposed era. While mainstream historians dismiss the theory as pseudo-history, it raises haunting questions about how we verify the past. The steady tick of our modern clocks becomes mysteriously uncertain when we wonder if time itself might be a carefully constructed lie agreed upon by those who write history. How much of what we call historical fact might be nothing more than stories told by the victors? You're standing in the court of Versailles in 1700, where the death of childless Spanish King Charles II will plunge Europe into 13 years of global warfare. Charles left his throne to Philip of Anjou, grandson of French King Louis XIV, threatening to unite the French and Spanish empires under one ruler. European powers formed the Grand Alliance to prevent this, launching a conflict that spread from the battlefields of Belgium to the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. The war introduced modern concepts of balance of power while creating the first truly global conflict, with battles fought simultaneously in Europe, North America, and South America. When peace finally came, Spain lost its European territories, France was bankrupted, and Britain emerged as the dominant naval power. The gentle rustle of modern diplomatic papers reminds us that single deaths can reshape entire continents when succession laws collide with international ambitions. What seemingly private family matters today might be quietly setting the stage for tomorrow's public crises. You're visiting the charnel house of Hallstatt, Austria, where families have decorated their ancestors' skulls with flowers and names for over 600 years. When the small cemetery became overcrowded, the community developed a unique solution. After 10 years of burial, remains would be exhumed and the skulls painted with beautiful designs before being placed in the bone house. After 10 years of burial, remains would be exhumed and the skulls painted with beautiful designs before being placed in the bone house. Each skull became a canvas decorated with roses, ivy, and crosses in soft pastels, transforming death into delicate art. Families continued visiting their painted relatives, maintaining relationships that transcended mortality. The last skull was painted in 1960, ending a tradition that saw death as something to beautify rather than hide. The gentle mountain breeze through Hallstatt's windows carries the whisper of a community that found beauty in life's inevitable end, turning the bone house into a gallery where love conquered fear through art. How might our understanding of loss change if we celebrated it as art rather than treating it as failure? You're examining a medieval specimen cabinet in Germany, where dozens of rat skeletons remain frozen in their most mysterious formation. Rat kings occur when baby rats' tails become so entangled with ice, tree sap, or their own waste that they form a living wheel, unable to separate for the rest of their lives. These creatures became omens of plague and disaster in European folklore. Yet modern science confirms they were real biological phenomena. The largest recorded rat king contained 32 individual rats. Their tails knotted so tightly they moved as one organism. They survived by cooperating, with outer rats feeding inner ones, creating an accidental commune born from misfortune. Museums still display these natural sculptures, testament to how life finds ways to continue even in impossible circumstances. The gentle scratch of modern mice reminds us that survival sometimes requires the strangest forms of cooperation. What seemingly impossible situations in our lives might actually be opportunities for unexpected collaboration. You're standing in 1940 Warsaw, where Polish cavalry officer Witold Pilecki deliberately gets himself arrested to infiltrate the most notorious concentration camp in history. While others fled the Nazis, Pilecki walked toward certain death with a secret mission: gather intelligence and organize resistance from inside Auschwitz. For over 2 years, he documented the systematic murder while building an underground network of inmates. He smuggled reports to the outside world that provided the first detailed accounts of the Holocaust, information the Allies initially dismissed as too extreme to believe. When he finally escaped in 1943, his reports became crucial evidence of Nazi war crimes. After the war, the communist Polish government executed him as a Western spy. The quiet turning of history pages reminds us that the greatest heroes often work in shadows, choosing impossible missions because someone must bear witness to unbearable truths. What acts of courage might be happening around us that we'll only recognize in retrospect? You're walking through 18th century London, where the demand for fresh corpses has created Britain's strangest black market economy. Medical schools needed bodies for dissection, but religious law only permitted using executed criminals, far too few for advancing anatomical knowledge. This shortage created the profession of resurrection men, who would steal fresh graves within hours of burial and sell them to anatomy professors who asked no questions. The trade became so lucrative that families installed iron cages called mort safes over graves, hired guards to watch cemeteries, and even booby-trapped coffins. Burke and Hare famously escalated from grave robbing to murder, killing 16 people to supply Edinburgh's medical school. The gentle beep of modern medical equipment echoes this dark foundation, reminding us that life-saving knowledge often rests on morally complicated histories. What beneficial advances in our world might have troubling origins we prefer not to examine? You're holding a lime-soaked handkerchief to your nose in London during the summer of 1858, when the Thames became an open sewer so putrid that Parliament considered relocating the government. Decades of dumping human waste directly into the river had created a toxic soup that, combined with an unusually hot summer, produced a stench powerful enough to make people vomit from blocks away. Politicians hung lime-soaked curtains over House of Commons windows and debated fleeing to Windsor Castle to escape the smell. The crisis forced immediate action on London's sewer system, something they had delayed for years, proving that sometimes progress requires the right combination of crisis and disgust. Engineer Joseph Bazalgette designed the network of sewers that still serves London today, built from desperate necessity to breathe clean air. The gentle flow of modern plumbing reminds us that civilization's greatest victories often emerge from its most embarrassing problems. What basic necessities are we taking for granted that previous generations fought desperately to achieve? You're standing on a Los Angeles rooftop in February 1942, watching anti-aircraft guns fire over 1,400 rounds at invisible enemies in the night sky. Just months after Pearl Harbor, radar operators detected what appeared to be enemy aircraft approaching the city. Air raid sirens wailed, searchlights swept the darkness, and artillery crews opened fire for hours, illuminating the sky with bursts of light and shrapnel. When dawn broke, no evidence of enemy aircraft was found, only damaged buildings from falling debris and 5 civilians dead from heart attacks and car crashes during the blackout. The military insisted they had repelled a Japanese attack, while skeptics suggested mass hysteria triggered by weather balloons or nerves. The gentle hum of modern aircraft reminds us how fear can make us fight battles against shadows, turning our own defenses into the very danger we sought to prevent. What invisible threats might we be battling today that exist more in our minds than in reality? You're meeting John Santini Eichel in early 18th century Bohemia, where this architect creates buildings that seem to dance between life and death. His Gothic Revival churches feature rib-like arches, skull-inspired decorations, and windows that resemble empty eye sockets, as if architecture itself had become skeletal. Working during the Catholic Counter-Reformation, Santini designed over 100 buildings that merged Christian symbolism with memento mori themes, reminding worshippers that death gives meaning to life. His masterpiece, the Church of St. John of Nepomuk, appears to float above its foundation like a ghost made solid. Local craftsmen whispered that he studied anatomy books to understand how buildings could mirror human bones. The gentle echo of footsteps in his surviving churches carries the message that beauty and mortality dance together, creating art from humanity's most universal experience. How might our creations change if we embraced rather than avoided reminders of life's temporary nature? You're standing in medieval Europe in 1325, where the theft of a simple wooden container will escalate into a battle that kills thousands. The cities of Bologna and Modena had nursed territorial disputes for generations. But when Modenese soldiers raided Bologna and stole an oak bucket from a public well, it became the insult that demanded blood. Bologna declared war, raising an army of 32,000 to reclaim their bucket and restore their honor, while Modena gathered 7,000 defenders who refused to return what they considered rightfully captured. The Battle of Zappolino followed, where 2,000 soldiers died fighting over what historians now call the War of the Bucket. Modena won decisively, and the bucket still hangs in their cathedral today, a wooden monument to the absurd triggers of human conflict. The quiet creak of modern containers reminds us that wars often begin with symbols rather than genuine substance. What seemingly insignificant objects in our lives might be worth fighting over if they represented something larger than themselves. You're entering the Harvard Medical School classroom of George Burgess McGrath in 1920s Boston, where America's first forensic pathologist trains investigators to read the stories that corpses tell. Before McGrath, most suspicious deaths were ruled on by coroners with no medical training, leading to countless unsolved murders. He developed systematic methods for determining time of death, identifying poisons, and reading the subtle signs that distinguish accident from homicide. His most famous case involved the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, where his ballistics testimony helped convict 2 Italian immigrants in a controversial case that divided the nation. Students called him the Sherlock Holmes of the morgue for his ability to solve mysteries that baffled police detectives. The gentle hum of modern autopsy equipment echoes his revolutionary idea that the dead can speak if we learn their language, transforming death from mystery into science. What other silent witnesses around us might be trying to tell us truths we haven't learned to hear? You're standing in Boston's North End on January 15, 1919, where an unseasonably warm day will trigger one of the city's strangest disasters. A massive steel tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses suddenly ruptures, sending a 25-foot wall of syrup racing through the streets at 35 miles per hour. The brown wave crushes buildings, overturns vehicles, and traps pedestrians in sticky death as the sweet tsunami engulfs everything in its path. 21 people die and 150 are injured in what sounds like a children's story gone horribly wrong. The cleanup takes weeks, with workers using salt water to dissolve the mess, and residents claim they could smell molasses on hot summer days for decades afterward. The gentle sweetness of modern syrup carries the reminder that even the most innocent substances can become deadly when contained improperly, turning everyday comfort into unexpected catastrophe. What other benign materials around us might be hiding potential for surprising destruction? You're walking through the German city of Erfurt in 1237, where dozens of children have begun dancing uncontrollably in the streets, unable to stop their frenzied movement until they collapse from exhaustion. This dancing mania spreads like wildfire through the young population, with witnesses describing participants leaping, twisting, and writhing as if possessed by invisible forces. Some children dance themselves to death, while others are found days later in nearby villages, still moving to rhythms only they can hear. Priests perform exorcisms, doctors prescribe bloodletting, yet nothing stops the epidemic of involuntary choreography. Historians suggest everything from ergot poisoning to mass hysteria, but medieval chroniclers recorded it as supernatural possession. The soft shuffle of modern feet on cobblestones reminds us how mysterious the connection between mind and body remains. how easily our sense of control can slip away when invisible forces take hold. What other compulsions might be sleeping in our collective unconscious, waiting for the right moment to emerge? You're standing in the physician quarters beneath the Colosseum in 150 CE, where Galen of Pergamon performs the world's first sports medicine by studying wounded gladiators. Unable to dissect human corpses due to religious law, this brilliant Greek doctor learned anatomy by treating fighters whose bodies were opened by sword and claw. He observed beating hearts through chest wounds, examined exposed organs during abdominal injuries, and studied the nervous system when spinal damage left gladiators paralyzed but alive. His anatomical discoveries, written while blood stained his hands, became medical textbooks used for the next 1,500 years. Gladiators unknowingly advanced human knowledge with every wound, their suffering transformed into healing wisdom for future generations. The gentle beep of modern heart monitors echoes his revolutionary understanding that sometimes knowledge emerges from the most tragic circumstances, turning Colosseum brutality into medical breakthrough. What other painful experiences in our lives might be teaching us lessons we don't yet recognize? You're watching flames consume ancient Rome in 64 CE, yet witnessing the birth of the world's first comprehensive city planning when Emperor Nero uses the catastrophe as an opportunity for transformation. While legend claims he fiddled while Rome burned, Nero actually coordinated firefighting efforts and personally funded relief for victims. When 2/3 of the city lay in ashes, he implemented revolutionary building codes: wider streets to prevent fire spread, height limits on buildings, and requirements for fireproof materials. He created Rome's first public parks, built a magnificent palace with gardens, and established the urban planning principles that modern cities still follow. The fire that seemed like civilization's end became the foundation for safer, more beautiful urban design. The gentle hum of modern city planning offices carries echoes of his vision, proving that sometimes destruction clears space for unprecedented progress. What apparent disasters in our lives might actually be clearing the way for better foundations? You're meeting Giovanni Battista Piranesi in 18th century Rome, where this architect creates buildings that seem to emerge from ancient graveyards. His designs feature skull-inspired doorways, ribcage arches, and decorative elements that transform architectural space into meditation on mortality. Working during the Enlightenment's fascination with ruins, Piranesi studied Roman catacombs and incorporated their memento mori themes into contemporary buildings. His engravings of imaginary prisons became famous throughout Europe, showing impossible architectural spaces where stone itself seemed alive with death's beauty. He believed that confronting mortality through architecture would make worshippers more grateful for life. Modern architects still study his work, finding in his skeletal designs a way to make buildings that acknowledge rather than deny human fragility. The gentle echo of footsteps in his surviving structures reminds us that art becomes most powerful when it embraces rather than avoids life's deepest truths. How might our creations change if we built them to acknowledge rather than ignore our temporary nature? You're standing at the border between Costa Rica and Nicaragua in 1856, where a wandering cow will nearly trigger a Central American war. A Costa Rican farmer's cow strayed across the poorly marked border and began grazing on Nicaraguan territory. When Nicaraguan authorities confiscated the animal, Costa Rica demanded its return, claiming the cow was rightfully theirs and had been stolen. Diplomatic tensions escalated when both nations mobilized troops to defend their position over a single farm animal. The Organization of American States eventually mediated the dispute, but not before thousands of soldiers faced off across the border, ready to fight over what newspapers mockingly called the most valuable cow in history. The incident highlighted how arbitrary national boundaries could transform the simplest misunderstandings into potential conflicts. The gentle lowing of modern cattle reminds us that wars often begin with trivial triggers, when nations are seeking excuses to assert dominance? What minor disagreements today might be masking larger conflicts waiting to emerge? You're standing in the Egyptian desert in 525 BCE, watching the Persian army of Cambyses II prepare for what will become history's greatest military mystery. According to Herodotus, 50,000 Persian soldiers marched from Thebes to attack the oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, but never arrived at their destination. No trace was ever found. No bones, no weapons, no evidence of battle or retreat. Some historians suggest they were buried by a massive sandstorm, others that they were ambushed by local tribes, but modern archaeological expeditions have found nothing despite decades of searching. The desert kept its secret so completely that some scholars question whether the army ever existed. The gentle whisper of sand across modern dunes carries the mystery of how 50,000 people can simply disappear from history, leaving behind only ancient stories and endless speculation about what really happened in the vast emptiness of the Sahara. What other mysteries from our past might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to see them? You're entering the Père Lachaise Cemetery in 1804 Paris, where Napoleon's administration creates the world's first cemetery designed specifically to be beautiful rather than merely functional. City planners realized that overcrowded urban graveyards threatened public health, so they designed this new burial ground like a park, with winding paths, elaborate monuments, and garden landscaping that made death seem peaceful rather than terrifying. Famous people began requesting burial there, turning the cemetery into a tourist destination where visitors came to picnic among the graves of celebrities. The concept spread across Europe and America, revolutionizing how societies thought about death and memorialization. Families would spend Sunday afternoons strolling among elaborate tombs, making death part of social life rather than hiding it away. The gentle rustle of leaves in modern memorial parks echoes this transformation, when death became art instead of horror. How might our understanding of loss change if we made mourning places into centers of beauty rather than sorrow? You're standing in a Quebec warehouse in 2011, where thieves have stolen 3,000 tons of maple syrup worth $18 million in what becomes known as the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. The syrup was stored in the Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve, a real government stockpile designed to control global maple syrup prices. Over several months, criminals systematically drained barrels and replaced the syrup with water, selling the stolen sweetness on the black market. The crime went undetected until routine inspections revealed warehouses full of water-filled barrels where liquid gold should have been. The heist exposed the serious economics behind Canada's most stereotypical export, revealing that maple syrup was regulated like oil and protected like national treasure. The gentle pour of syrup on modern pancakes carries the reminder that even the most innocent pleasures can become valuable enough to steal when supply meets demand in unexpected ways. What other everyday items around us might be more valuable than we realize? You're entering a medieval cathedral where Brother Marcus of Avignon oversees the most profitable business of the Middle Ages, manufacturing saints' bones. During the height of relic worship, every church needed holy remains to attract pilgrims and their donations. Marcus discovered that common animal bones, aged with wine and herbs, could pass for ancient saints' relics when sold to distant monasteries. His workshop produced hundreds of authentic finger bones, tooth fragments, and skull pieces, complete with certificates of authenticity written in convincing Latin. The business thrived because medieval Christians desperately wanted physical connections to the divine, creating a market where faith met commerce in the most literal way. His forgeries were so convincing that some are probably still venerated in churches today. The gentle chiming of cathedral bells reminds us that even the most sacred institutions can become marketplaces when human needs meet entrepreneurial opportunity. What other areas of our lives might be mixing genuine devotion with subtle deception? You're riding through 1890s America, where the bicycle craze has moralists convinced that two wheels will destroy society as we know it. Doctors warned that cycling caused bicycle face, a permanent expression of strain, and that the vibrations would damage women's reproductive organs. Religious leaders preached that bicycles encouraged immoral behavior by allowing young people to travel unchaperoned beyond their neighborhoods. Fashion critics worried that practical cycling clothes would masculinize women, while economists feared that bicycle manufacturing would collapse the horse industry and eliminate thousands of jobs. Despite these dire predictions, millions embraced cycling as liberation from the constraints of walking and expensive carriages. The panic subsided when automobiles arrived to become the new threat to civilization. The gentle whir of modern bicycle wheels reminds us that every technological advance creates fears that seem absurd in retrospect, yet feel genuinely threatening to those experiencing change. What current innovations might we be unnecessarily fearing while they quietly improve our lives? You're observing Alphonse Bertillon in 1882 Paris, where this police clerk revolutionizes criminal investigation by proving that bodies tell stories more accurate than witnesses. Before Bertillon, police relied on eyewitness accounts and confessions, often obtaining the wrong person. He developed anthropometry, precise body measurements that could identify individuals even after death or disfigurement. His system recorded 11 specific measurements, from head length to foot size, creating the first scientific method for identifying criminals. More importantly, he pioneered crime scene photography and evidence preservation, transforming police work from guesswork into science. His techniques solved cases that had baffled investigators for years, proving that careful observation could reveal truths that escaped casual examination. The gentle click of modern forensic cameras echoes his revolutionary insight that reality leaves traces everywhere, waiting for systematic eyes to read the stories written in bone, blood, and circumstance. What other evidence around us might be telling stories we haven't learned to read yet? You're entering a Victorian-era London artist's studio where William Holman Hunt mixes his colors with crushed Egyptian mummies. During the 19th century, tomb robbing had made mummified remains so common in Europe that they were ground into a brown pigment called mummy brown. Artists prized this paint for its rich, warm tone, never questioning the ethics of turning ancient people into art supplies. The practice was so widespread that art supply shops advertised authentic mummy powder alongside regular pigments. When Hunt discovered what he was painting with, he was so horrified that he buried his remaining mummy brown in his garden. The gentle brush strokes of modern painters carry echoes of this macabre tradition, when sacred remains became commercial products. Egyptian mummies, once preserved for eternal life, were literally consumed by European creativity, their immortality transformed into temporary beauty on canvas. What other sacred traditions might we be unknowingly commercializing in our modern world? You're standing in Beijing in 1958, where Mao Zedong's government mobilizes 600 million citizens to eliminate sparrows by banging pots and pans until the birds die of exhaustion. This Four Pests campaign targeted rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows as enemies of agricultural progress. For 3 days, the entire nation created constant noise, preventing sparrows from landing or resting. The campaign succeeded so completely that sparrow populations collapsed, but ecological disaster followed. Without sparrows to eat insects, locust swarms devastated crops, contributing to a famine that killed millions. Scientists quietly informed the government that sparrows actually ate more harmful insects than grain, but the campaign had already destroyed the natural balance. The gentle chirping of modern birds reminds us that ecosystems are more complex than political slogans suggest, and that war against nature often becomes war against ourselves. What other natural systems might we be disrupting without understanding the full consequences? You're meeting Heinrich Schliemann in 1870s Turkey, where this German businessman turned amateur archaeologist discovers Troy by following Homer's poetry like a treasure map. While professional scholars dismissed the Iliad as mythology, Schliemann believed every word and used the epic poem to guide his excavations. He found multiple ancient cities layered beneath modern Hissarlik, proving that legendary Troy was real. Though his methods were crude by modern standards, he destroyed upper layers to reach older ruins. His passion revolutionized archaeology. He smuggled Priam's treasure out of Turkey, claiming to have found the jewels of Helen of Troy. His wife Helena posed wearing the ancient golden diadems for photographs that made them both famous. The gentle brush of archaeologists cleaning artifacts today echoes his transformation of treasure hunting into systematic science, proving that sometimes amateur enthusiasm achieves what academic caution cannot. What other impossible dreams might be achievable if we approach them with enough passionate determination? You're navigating the politics of 16th century France, where three men named Henry simultaneously claim the throne, creating a civil war so complicated that chroniclers struggle to keep track of who's fighting whom. Henry III, the reigning king, battles Henry of Guise, who leads the Catholic League, while Henry of Navarre commands the Protestant Huguenots. Each Henry has legitimate claims, passionate followers, and foreign allies funding their ambitions. The conflict becomes a religious war, a succession crisis, and an international proxy conflict all at once. When an assassin kills Henry of Guise, Henry III allies with Henry of Navarre, but then Henry III is assassinated, leaving Henry of Navarre as Henry IV. The gentle turning of genealogy charts reminds us that sometimes history's greatest confusion comes not from complex causes, but from simple coincidences of nomenclature that turn politics into farce. What other situations in our lives might be more complicated than necessary simply because of unfortunate naming? You're observing Francis Galton in 1880s London, where this Victorian scientist proves that human fingerprints are unique, permanent, and hereditary, revolutionizing criminal investigation forever. While studying heredity, Galton noticed that fingerprint patterns remained unchanged throughout life and never repeated between individuals. He developed the first scientific classification system for fingerprints, creating categories still used by forensic experts today. His work transformed law enforcement from relying on witness testimony and confessions to using physical evidence that couldn't lie or forget. The first murder conviction based on fingerprint evidence followed within decades, beginning the age of scientific criminal investigation. Police departments worldwide adopted his system, making it impossible for criminals to escape their past by simply changing names or locations. The gentle press of modern fingers on screens echoes his discovery that identity literally lies at our fingertips, waiting to be read by those who understand the language written in our skin. What other unique signatures might we be carrying without realizing they could identify us? You're stepping off a ship in 1920s Honduras, where the United Fruit Company wields more power than the government, controlling ports, railroads, and telegraph lines across Central America. This American corporation owned over 3 million acres of tropical land, employed private armies, and influenced elections to protect its banana monopoly. When governments tried to regulate working conditions or raise taxes, United Fruit simply threatened to withdraw its business, which would collapse entire national economies. The company's political influence was so complete that it could request U.S. military interventions to protect its interests. Workers lived in company towns, shopped at company stores, and were paid in company currency that couldn't be spent elsewhere. The sweet taste of modern bananas carries the complex history of corporate colonialism, when fruit became more powerful than flags, and agricultural products shaped international relations more than diplomacy. What other everyday products might be quietly wielding more influence over global politics than we realize? You're entering the anatomy theater of Padua University in 1550, where Andreas Vesalius performs public dissections that become the hottest entertainment in Renaissance Italy. These anatomical demonstrations drew crowds like theatrical performances, with tiered seating allowing hundreds of spectators to watch professors cut open human corpses. Vesalius revolutionized medicine by dissecting bodies himself rather than simply reading from ancient texts while assistants did the cutting. His hands-on approach revealed that many anatomical facts accepted for over 1,000 years were completely wrong. These public dissections became social events where nobles, scholars, and curious citizens gathered to witness the unveiling of human mysteries. The gentle hum of modern operating rooms echoes these theatrical origins. When surgery was performance, education was entertainment, and the human body became a stage for displaying the wonders hidden beneath our skin. What other essential knowledge might we be missing because we rely on old authorities instead of direct observation? You're standing in 16th century Russia, where Peter the Great wages war against traditional beards by personally cutting them off nobles at court. Determined to modernize Russia by adopting Western European customs, Peter declared beards symbols of backward thinking and ordered all men except peasants and priests to shave. Those who wanted to keep their beards had to pay a special beard tax and carry a metal token proving they'd paid. Tax collectors would stop bearded men on streets to check their permits, creating a bizarre bureaucracy around facial hair. The Orthodox Church condemned beard shaving as unchristian, making whiskers a matter of religious rebellion. Peter himself carried scissors and would spontaneously trim courtiers' beards during social gatherings, turning grooming into political theater. The gentle buzz of modern razors reminds us that even the most personal choices can become symbols of larger cultural battles between tradition and change. What other seemingly private decisions might actually be political statements we haven't recognized? You're meeting the citizens of Otranto, Italy, in 1480, where survivors of Ottoman raids create the Chapel of Bones as a memorial to their massacred neighbors. After 800 residents were killed for refusing to convert to Islam, the survivors gathered their bones and arranged them into elaborate wall decorations that transformed tragedy into sacred art. Unlike other bone churches created for practical reasons, this ossuary was built from grief and defiance, turning death into a declaration that love survives destruction. Each skull was positioned with care, creating patterns that spelled out messages of faith and remembrance. Families could visit to pray among their ancestors, finding comfort in collective memory made visible. The gentle echo of prayers in the chapel carries the message that communities can transform even the worst tragedies into something beautiful when they refuse to let horror have the final word. How might we transform our own losses into something that brings comfort to others? You're standing in 1630s Amsterdam, where tulip bulbs have become more valuable than houses, creating history's first recorded economic bubble. These exotic flowers, recently imported from Turkey, became status symbols among wealthy Dutch merchants who competed to own the rarest varieties. A single bulb of the coveted Semper Augustus tulip could cost more than a luxury canal house. Futures markets developed where people bought and sold tulips that hadn't even bloomed yet, with prices rising to astronomical levels as speculation fever gripped the nation. When the bubble burst in 1637, fortunes vanished overnight and families faced ruin over flowers they'd never actually seen. The gentle sway of modern tulips in spring gardens reminds us that human psychology can transform the most beautiful things into instruments of financial madness, proving that bubbles are as old as desire itself. What other beautiful things in our world might we be turning into dangerous obsessions without realizing it? Hey friends, if these gentle journeys through history's most surprising moments are helping guide you toward peaceful rest, don't forget to subscribe for more soothing tales that prove human nature is endlessly fascinating across all centuries. You're entering the tomb of Qin Shi Huang in 210 BCE, where China's first emperor has surrounded himself with an army of 8,000 terracotta warriors to guard his eternal sleep. Each clay soldier stands life-sized with unique facial features, armor, and weapons, representing the emperor's obsession with conquering death itself. The emperor consumed mercury pills believing they would grant immortality, slowly poisoning himself while building the most elaborate tomb in human history. Rivers of liquid mercury flow beneath his burial chamber, recreating the geography of his empire in precious metal. Craftsmen who knew the tomb's secrets were sealed inside alive to protect its mysteries. The gentle footsteps of modern tourists echo through halls where an emperor tried to take his entire world with him into the afterlife, proving that even unlimited power cannot purchase passage beyond the grave. What would we choose to take with us if we could bring anything into eternity? You're standing in Brasstown, North Carolina, on New Year's Eve 1999, where residents lower a stuffed opossum instead of a ball to mark midnight. This tradition began when local gas station owner Clay Logan decided his small town deserved its own Times Square moment, but with distinctly Southern flair. The original ceremony used a live opossum in a plexiglass box, but animal rights protests led to using roadkill preserved by taxidermy. Thousands gather annually to watch the possum drop, complete with country music, local food vendors, and speeches about small-town pride. The event attracts national media attention for its cheerful embrace of rural stereotypes that other communities might hide. The gentle twang of banjo music reminds us that celebration takes infinite forms, and that communities can create meaningful traditions from the most unexpected materials when they refuse to take themselves too seriously. What unusual traditions might emerge if we stopped worrying about what others think of our celebrations? You're following Eugene Dubois through the jungles of Java in 1891, where this Dutch anatomist discovers the first evidence that human ancestors created art long before agriculture or writing. His find of Java man fossils revolutionized understanding of human evolution, but equally important were the nearby cave paintings he documented. These images, created by early hominids over 40,000 years ago, showed that artistic expression emerged simultaneously with human consciousness. The paintings depicted animals, handprints, and abstract symbols that suggested our ancestors possessed symbolic thinking far earlier than previously believed. Modern dating techniques later confirmed that these artistic impulses appeared across multiple continents within the same time period, as if creativity awakened globally in the human species. The gentle scratch of pencils on modern paper echoes humanity's oldest urge to leave marks that say, "I was here," proving that art is not luxury but essential human nature. What creative impulses in our lives might be more fundamental to our humanity than we realize? You're standing in Versailles in 1789, where Marie Antoinette's solid gold chamber pot becomes a symbol of aristocratic excess that helped spark the French Revolution. While peasants starved, the queen relieved herself on furniture worth more than entire villages could earn in lifetimes. Revolutionary pamphlets circulated detailed descriptions of royal bathroom fixtures, turning intimate hygiene into political theater. Citizens calculated how many families could eat for years on the value of a single royal toilet, transforming bodily functions into economic arguments against monarchy. When revolutionaries stormed the palace, they specifically sought out and destroyed these golden symbols of inequality, melting them down for currency that would feed the hungry. The gentle flush of modern toilets reminds us that even the most private human needs can become public political statements when inequality reaches extremes that transform necessity into obscene luxury. What everyday luxuries in our world might be quietly creating resentment among those who lack basic necessities? You're meeting Giuseppe Pasqualini in 16th century Sicily, where this Capuchin monk develops techniques for preserving bodies that turn death into art lasting centuries. His Palermo catacombs become a gallery where families dress their deceased relatives in finest clothes and arrange them in lifelike poses along corridor walls. Unlike other bone churches, this ossuary maintains individual identity, with each body labeled by name, profession, and social status. Wealthy families compete to provide the most elaborate preservation for their loved ones, creating a marketplace where death becomes luxury service. Children visit grandparents who remain visibly present generations after dying, making mortality a continued family relationship rather than final separation. The gentle whisper of air through the catacombs carries conversations between living and dead, where preservation technology allowed love to literally outlast life. How might our understanding of loss change if we could maintain physical relationships with those we've lost? You're witnessing the aftermath of the 1786 sheep invasion of Spain, where millions of migrating sheep destroy crops across the entire Iberian Peninsula. The Mesta, a powerful guild of sheep owners, had legal rights to move their flocks along ancient routes, regardless of property boundaries or agricultural damage. Their sheep literally ate Spain's food security, consuming grain fields and vegetable gardens as they followed traditional paths between summer and winter pastures. Farmers could not legally stop the sheep or seek compensation, creating economic warfare between agricultural and pastoral interests. The system was so economically destructive that historians credit it with contributing to Spain's decline as a European power. The gentle bleating of modern sheep reminds us that even the most innocent animals can become instruments of political power when legal systems prioritize traditional privileges over practical needs. What other seemingly harmless traditions might be quietly undermining our collective prosperity? You're joining a 12th century pilgrimage route, where Brother Thomas of Canterbury creates Europe's first tourist industry by marketing St. Thomas Becket's relics. After Becket's murder in Canterbury Cathedral, Thomas recognized that pilgrims would pay handsomely to touch objects that had contacted the saint's body. He organized the production and sale of holy souvenirs, vials of water tinged with the saint's blood, pieces of cloth that had touched his tomb, and miniature lead badges proving pilgrimage completion. His marketing genius transformed religious devotion into economic engine, making Canterbury one of Europe's wealthiest cities. Pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles to purchase spiritual merchandise, creating medieval tourism industry complete with guidebooks, hostels, and standardized routes. The gentle chime of modern souvenir shops echoes his innovation that spiritual experience could be packaged, sold, and taken home as physical proof of transformative travel. What other experiences in our lives might we be commercializing without recognizing we're turning sacred moments into products? You're sailing past the Scilly Isles in 1600s England, where Trinity House wages economic warfare against private lighthouse owners by deliberately extinguishing competing beacons. This government corporation held monopoly rights over maritime navigation aids and systematically destroyed unauthorized lighthouses that might reduce their profits. Ship captains were forced to pay Trinity House fees, even when private lighthouses provided better service, creating a system where maritime safety became secondary to bureaucratic revenue. Shipwrecks increased in areas where Trinity House eliminated competing lights, proving that monopolies could literally kill when applied to essential services. The conflict lasted decades, with private lighthouse operators rebuilding their beacons nightly, while Trinity House agents destroyed them by day. The steady beam of modern lighthouses reminds us that even life-saving services can become weapons when institutions prioritize control over public benefit. What other essential services might be suffering because someone has turned basic human needs into profit centers? You're observing Grafton Elliott Smith in 1920s Egypt, where this anatomist uses modern forensic techniques to solve the 3,000-year-old murder of Pharaoh Ramesses III. Royal mummies had always been examined for historical curiosity, but Smith approached them as crime scenes, applying contemporary investigative methods to ancient remains. His detailed examination revealed that Ramesses III died from a deep throat wound that severed his larynx and major blood vessels, proving he was assassinated rather than dying naturally. Court records confirmed a harem conspiracy led by one of his wives, making this the first ancient murder solved by modern science. Smith's work established forensic archaeology, proving that scientific methods could read stories written in bones millennia after witnesses died. The gentle hum of modern CT scanners echoes his revolutionary insight that death preserves evidence across centuries, waiting for technology advanced enough to hear what the dead are trying to tell us. What other ancient mysteries might be solvable if we applied our current knowledge to old evidence? Dear listeners, you've traveled through 100 moments when truth surpassed imagination, when ordinary people created extraordinary circumstances, when the impossible became historical fact. From dancing plagues to missing armies, from bone churches to bicycle panics, we've seen that human nature remains constant across centuries, while manifesting in endlessly surprising ways. Each story reminds us that the present moment you're living right now will someday seem just as bizarre to future generations learning about our customs, fears, and obsessions. The gentle rhythm of your breathing connects you to every person in these tales, all of whom once lay down to sleep wondering about the strangeness of their world. History isn't distant events, but continuing human story of which you are the current author, writing tomorrow's unbelievable tale with today's ordinary choices. The soft whisper of time moving forward carries the promise that reality will always be stranger, more wonderful, and more mysterious than any fiction we could imagine. What impossible story are you living right now that future listeners will find just as incredible as these? Thank you for joining this gentle journey through history's most surprising corners. Sweet dreams, dear friends, and remember, you are living in tomorrow's most unbelievable historical moment. If these stories have brought you comfort, peace, or wonder, please subscribe for more soothing explorations of the magnificent strangeness that surrounds us always.